Okay, let's talk about the interwar period, the rise of totalitarianism in the Soviet Union, in Italy, and in Nazi Germany. These are new types of dictatorships that emerge in the interwar period after World War One, although they have sort of origins in the World War One and pre-World War One period. There are a couple of interesting characteristics about these states. Not sure why I have fascist Italy twice there, but it's one of the totalitarian states. It's actually Mussolini, who takes power in Italy, that coins the term totalitarianism. What we find with characteristics of these sort of totalitarian systems, these types of systems that distinguish them from regular dictatorships, because you have dictatorships before and you have dictatorships after, or these principal characteristics, dictatorships obviously have a leader. A totalitarian system obviously has a leader, one leader who comes from one political party. It's not a multi-party state, but only one political party is allowed. And the leader of that party is the leader of the country. And so when you think about this type of leader, it's a leader who believes that he has an incredible amount of power and ability to solve the country's problems. And a lot of citizens, there's this cult of personality that emerges where citizens look to this leader as somebody who is specially gifted, a human being, but somebody with extraordinary gifts and power who can fix the problems in that society. And we'll see that's going to be Lenin and Stalin in the Soviet Union, Mussolini in fascist Italy, where you have signs all over the place that Mussolini is always right. He's the leader, he's Il Duce. And Hitler, of course, in Nazi Germany. There is an official propaganda. You have to think a certain way. You are not allowed to have sort of a diverse view of how the system operates, a diverse view of human relationships, a diverse view of political ideas. In fact, what you have is a leader with one party who promotes a particular ideology, and that's the official ideology that you have to accept. It is propaganda. Propaganda used to mean, at least it used to be viewed in less negative terms as it is today. Today, we tend to associate propaganda with lies. What propaganda was just getting your message out, sort of like a press release for the political party. Here are the ideas we believe, and you have to accept them, because these societies also have powerful police forces that terrorize the population. So powerful police forces, a police state emerges. Now, Italy is going to have the weakest of these police states. Italy we'll see is the weakest of these totalitarian states, in fact. But all of them have powerful police forces that imprison their political enemies, not just criminals, but political enemies, people who hold a different ideology. And one of the things these totalitarian leaders want to do is revolutionize society, change society dramatically, create a new elite within society, and force citizens to think in a different way so that they accept these ideologies that they're pushing. Fascism in Italy, communism in the Soviet Union, or Nazism in Germany. That is, one way they do this is to control the media, to control the schools, so you indoctrinate children at an early age. Media on radio, later on TV can do this, but TV is not something until you get the late 30s where people might watch that, but movies. So you indoctrinate people in order to create a new society where people believe, or at least accept, and don't challenge the official propaganda. There are distinctions between left-wing totalitarianism, communism, and right-wing totalitarianism, that is fascism in Italy and Nazism in Germany. And the big distinction is the role of private property. Communism wants to abolish most notions of private property. No, they're not going to take your iPhone or every pot and pan you have, although they do take some of that stuff. But what you see within a communist state is a socialized system where everything is communally owned. There's no sort of free market, or it's a remarkably limited free market in a communist society. Whereas in fascism and under Nazism, private property is fine. The free market is a system that's in place, although it's very much regulated by the government of those two countries. So let's look at Russia first. We talked about Russia earlier, the Russian Revolution. It was Lenin and the Bolsheviks who overthrew that sort of provisional government that emerged, that had actually, the government that appeared after the Tsar was overthrown, or the Tsar abdicated, I should say. Lenin and the Bolsheviks take over, and they move to establish a communist dictatorship. They have their own secret police. They take control over the economy. There's this brutal, brutal and bloody civil war that emerges where enemies of communism, enemies of the Bolsheviks, the whites, fight the Reds. And there are a variety of different white forces with different political orientations. Some want to restore the Tsar, some want to sort of break away from the Russian Empire altogether and form sort of independent countries, different groups. But ultimately, the Bolsheviks win. The Reds, the Red Army, which is created by Leon Trotsky, the communists, they win the Civil War. And shortly thereafter, it had actually begun during the Civil War. They have to deal with a devastated country. Russia was ruined by World War I. Russia was unprepared for World War I. That's part of the reason why Lenin and the Bolsheviks were able to seize power in a revolution. The economy has collapsed as well. You have massive production losses. It has declined dramatically. Massive unemployment. Agricultural years have collapsed because the system is just broken down. And what you end up with is a massive famine. People just starve to death in Russia. We estimate that somewhere between maybe 4 and 5 million people starve to death. People in America are raising money to send to Russia to feed people, and gathering food to send to Russia to assist and just to provide some nourishment to these Russians. It wasn't odd for you to say roam the countryside at that time, or not necessarily roam, but walk around the countryside and just see large numbers of children who are gathering. These are children whose parents have died in the Civil War or died from famine, and they're just wandering the countryside. So this is a state that has effectively collapsed. And Lenin and the Bolsheviks are in charge, and they have to figure out what to do. Now, what Vladimir Lenin does, is he thinks that perhaps we tried to institute communism too quickly. We need to rebuild this society. We're going to have to reintroduce some capitalism. That's the new economic policy. That's like introducing sin to communism, but that's what they do. Restoring some freedoms. The free market returns to agriculture. Small businesses can sell things for profit. That is a sinful thing to do for communists, but if you pay attention to the way market-based economies work and socialist economies work, you realize that market-based economies tend to do a whole lot better. And I'm not necessarily knocking all social programs of that. Some of those are needed, but market-based economies do better than socialist economies. And there's Vladimir Lenin. He's in charge with the new economic policy. He's a sickly man. He has some heart trouble. He's going to die 1924, doesn't actually name a replacement. And there is a sort of contest between these two key figures. One is kind of a shadowy guy, Joseph Stalin. People don't know a lot about him. He's not this great national figure. He doesn't have some great role in the Russian Revolution. He is secretary of the Communist Party. And as secretary of the Communist Party, he is an individual who knows people, who is involved in helping to promote people. So he gathers around him a lot of allies. The other guy that many Russians have heard of, because he has a prominent role in Russia and he had a prominent role in the Russian Revolution, was Leon Trotsky, the founder of the Red Army, the second most important guy in the Russian Revolution. And they're sort of vying for power to see who would replace Lenin to basically run Russia, even though Russia supposedly has a Politburo that reaches decision, a council that reaches decision. It's actually one individual who makes most of the decisions and runs the country. So they're vying for power. And they sort of each have their own ideas about which trajectory Russia should take. Stalin promotes the idea of socialism in one country. And when a communist talks about socialism, they really mean what we consider to be communism. So socialism, communism, just think that those words are interchangeable for a communist. And there are actual socialists out there who think differently. But for a communist, and for this presentation, this lecture, let's just see socialism and communism as the same thing. What Stalin says is, instead of maybe spreading revolution or focusing heavily on spreading worldwide revolution, which is something that communists believe in, that the only way communism can survive is if the rest of the world becomes communist, because the capitalist enemies will always try to crush it. Stalin decides, let's build socialism in one country, that is the Soviet Union. Let's turn the Soviet Union into a communist country first. And we can also try to spread revolution. They do that, but the main focus is building communism within Russia, turning the Soviet Union into a communist country. Remember, it has the new economic policy. That's capitalism. That's the free market. So Stalin's going to want to get rid of that ultimately. And he starts building up allies, building up allies. He's really a clever and absolutely ruthless and brutal individual. He's called Comrade Card Index because he has all these names on what, I don't know if you heard of a Rolodex prior to the age of computers and all that. He knows people. He knows who to promote. He knows who to have around him. Whereas Trotsky is sort of less diplomatic, less politically oriented. And when I mean politically oriented, less likely to build a friendship with other communists who can promote him as leader. He's less diplomatic. He's less of he's a schemer, but less of a gifted schemer as Stalin. And Trotsky irritates some people, and he's going to be outmaneuvered. What Trotsky believes is different from Stalin. Trotsky believes in a policy known as permanent revolution. That is, you can't just build communism within Russia. You have to spread revolution simultaneously all around the world, or communism won't survive within Russia. So you have two different ideas. What essentially happens, there's some really interesting things that go on, how Stalin allies with one group, then turns against them. Ultimately, Stalin is basically going to outmaneuver Trotsky and push Trotsky aside, and Trotsky is going to be allowed to leave the country. Generally, what would happen is Stalin would basically kill everybody who he saw was a threat. Trotsky managed to be exiled out of the country. Later on, Stalin will have Trotsky killed in about 1940 when Trotsky's living in Mexico City. He's going to be killed by agents of Stalin. But anyway, Stalin is in charge by 1928, and he begins to turn Russia into a communist country. He is a devout communist. What does he want to do? He eliminates NEP, that new economic policy, and engages in massive planning of the economy and an into privatization, massive industrialization programs. What he has are 5-year plans with all these lofty goals about how much coal to be produced, how much steel to be produced. And he's focusing on heavy industry. He's focusing on things that build up the military, not consumer items. You're not going to be able to go to a store and buy a lot of stuff. It's focusing on heavy industry and building up the Soviet military and trying to build roads and trains and all that stuff. So that if you are a consumer and you want a lot to eat, you're just not going to find much at the markets. If you want to have different clothes, that's going to be a challenge. The Soviet Union decides, well, how many pairs of shoes does someone need? One. What color? Brown. How long do they need to last? A couple of years. That is, it is a system of control that decides those things for the consumer. They decide what people need, how much they need of it, what color it should be. They make those decisions because they want to industrialize Russia and to make Russia as much of an industrialized country as sort of Western Europe and the United States. It consciously competes with the United States here. As part of the 5-year plans to industrialize Russia, by the way, these plans, Stalin declares that the goals are met early, 1 year early, so they start a new 5-year plan. And we don't know. They actually do build up Russia industrially. We don't know. It's hard to trust some of the figures that they give us from Russia. But a big part of this is you're going to have a large urban working class. You're going to have coal miners. You're going to have people in steel mills and factories. You're going to have people, you're going to have a call for the electrification of communities. So you need all these urban workers and they have to be fed. So what Stalin believes is we need to get rid of privatized agriculture. So he supports something known as the collectivization of agriculture. Farmers are going to be basically state workers. Their land is going to be taken from them. Their livestock is going to be taken from them. They will only be allowed to keep certain tools. They will only be allowed to keep certain kitchen items, for instance. They'll be told how much food that they grow that they can keep. Basically the communists are calculating how many calories people might need to eat on a given day in order to be healthy, or at least to continue as a worker and continue as a farmer. A part of this collectivization drive, where you take the land and put them on basically factory farms, make them become factory workers in the countryside, is to eliminate this group. They're called kulaks. They are designated for elimination. Millions of them are going to be eliminated, killed, arrested, thrown in the gulag. That's this massive prison labor camp system. And who is a kulak? These tend to be farmers, or peasants as they're called in Europe, farmers who are a little better off than others. They may have a little more land than others. They were able to have a nicer house than others. They were able to hire people to work on their farm. That is, people who behaved like capitalists. That is, in America, people go out and work and make money, and they hire people who work for them, that sort of thing. That system that operates within capitalism. Well, according to communists, these are evil, evil people. We could try to perhaps re-educate them to make them good commies, but that's probably a losing cause. So better to just eliminate them altogether. So they're going to be annihilated as a group, the kulaks. And who is a kulak? Anyone who opposes communism, because there are a lot of peasants who don't want to give up their land. There are peasants who don't want to give up their livestock, their cows, or whatever they may have. They don't want to give it to the state. And they slaughter their livestock. They destroy some of their crops. They're going to be labeled a kulak, and they're going to be eliminated. Whoever the commies dislike in the countryside is going to be labeled a kulak, and they're going to be eliminated. And there's Stalin. He's got a thick head of hair, and look at that stash. There he is. He's about 5'3". He's the shortest of these dictators, and absolutely ruthless. He is a paranoid individual. As part of this process, he is going to eliminate millions and millions and millions of people. We think that something like 20 million people die under Stalin's rule in the Soviet Union. And that's before World War II, where 27 million people die. So from about 1928 to 1939, some 20 million people within the Soviet Union are going to die because of Stalin. There's a terror famine through collectivization. Ukraine is this region where that has the bulk of Russia's or best farmland. And kulaks, what Stalin does is send in the military and the secret police, surround it and starve those people to death. Take the food and starve people to death. Within there, and some 5 to 7 million people die in what's called the Holodomor, the famine in the Ukraine. And they deny that it's happening. They deny that they're doing that, that these people are starving to death, but that's what they do. It's a conscious famine. They are consciously annihilating a group of people. There are other things that occur. One of the popular communists, a guy by the name of Sergei Kirov, communist chief in Leningrad, is going to be killed. He's probably killed by Stalin. You know, one of the things about Stalin is when he gave a speech, you would have people clapping for like 10, 15 minutes. Nobody wanted to be the first one to stop clapping. And apparently this guy Kirov was getting a bit too popular and had sort of more applause than Stalin. And so Stalin had him killed. But Stalin decides, oh my God, enemies of communism are all around. They've killed this great communist leader. He's the one who did it. And so he calls for all these terrorists. He calls for the population to be terrorized. We got to root out all these enemies of communism. And he actually goes after a number of old communists, people who were involved in the Russian Revolution, people who had prominent roles, more prominent roles than he had. And he has them eliminated. A number of famous communists, a number of communist leaders are going to be put on trial, show trials, where they confess their sins against communism, where they confess their sins against Stalin. And basically what Stalin says is communism. That's what people are supposed to believe at that time, whatever Stalin says. And if you maybe question whether the pace of industrialization went too fast, you're an enemy of communism, according to Stalin and his loyal allies. So he purges the party, gets rid of all kinds of people, has these incredible show trials where people confess. Generally what happened, they were tortured, their families threatened, some family members may have been killed, so they confess their sins. There's also this idea that when you are a communist, you treat communism as a secular religion. So if you are deeply religious, you don't think there's any evidence that anyone can tell you that can make your religion wrong. You believe it. You know, if you're Catholic, you believe in transubstantiation, all that stuff. And what some of these people may have had is a genuine belief that they've failed communism because they've defied Stalin in some way. Yeah, they didn't support collectivization. They may have criticized, you know, some of the massacres of the kulaks, that sort of thing. So some of them may have genuinely believed, yeah, I'm actually a sinful commie, you know, that sort of thing. So some may have been genuine in their confessions, but others were generally tortured and kept awake for I don't know how many days, forever. So they ultimately lied about turning on the Soviet Union and all that. But one of the things that also happens, it's not just the leadership of the party and communist officials. It happens to the military. Under Stalin, more leaders in the military, from the top to the bottom, almost all admirals in the Navy are going to be killed or imprisoned. No army suffers that much loss in leadership during World War I. So he emasculates the leadership of the military from the top to the bottom. And also within society, lots and lots of people just disappear. The secret police is incredibly powerful, and it has snoops all over the place. They're listening to people. If you tell the wrong joke, if you say the wrong thing, you know, if they supply people with a radio and you don't have the radio on when Stalin is giving a speech, you're in trouble and people disappear. I mean, you're in college right now. For instance, you could be sitting in a college classroom and you may talk to the student next to you, have a conversation, and all of a sudden the student doesn't show up. And he doesn't show up, and he doesn't show up, and she doesn't show up for a number of days. Well, you're not going to ask questions about that. You're not going to wonder, oh, does this student have the flu? What happened to this? No, the student's disappeared, gone forever. And as I said, perhaps 20 million people die under Stalin. No family is spared. Everybody knows somebody, whether it's in their family, immediate family, or a cousin who disappears. That's how powerful this terroristic system of communism is. And there is this massive, massive prison labor system known as the Gulag Archipelago, with camps, labor camps all over the place where lots of people, millions die and millions are worked to death. Brutal, brutal prison camp system. It's sort of the nature of the Soviet system. It's a prison camp system for all of its citizens, essentially. Now let's look at Italy. Italy is a bit different. Italy is a fascist country. Fascism is a far-right ideology. Communism is on the left. Fascists are very nationalistic. It's Mussolini in Italy. He wants to recreate the Roman Empire. Remember, in the ancient world, Rome ruled the Mediterranean. Italy is not really ruling too many things. So he wants to have this amazingly aggressive foreign policy. Fascism, so it's very nationalistic, militaristic, aggressive, and it demands complete loyalty to the state. It's an ideology that says you as an individual citizen are not important. That is, your life is less important than the life of the state. The country must survive. You must sacrifice for the goodwill, the good of the country, for all your fellow citizens so that the country survives. If you're called upon to go to war, you better go to war. If you're called upon to help recreate the Roman Empire, you better do that. Sacrifice your individualism for the betterment of the state, for the maintenance of the state. So it's a far-right ideology. It calls for the creation of a dictatorship, a totalitarian dictatorship with an official ideology, one leader, one party. And it's kind of interesting. Mussolini himself wasn't initially a right-wing guy. He was initially a socialist and kind of a communist. Prior to World War I, he was an editor of a socialist newspaper. But he gets kicked out of the Socialist Party because in World War I, he supports Italy's involvement in the war. Most socialists in Italy did not want Italy to be involved in the war. They thought it was a capitalist war, all that. But Mussolini says, no, I'm an Italian and Italians must fight. So they kick him out of the party, and he's going to fight and be wounded in the war and later organize his fascist party. Fascism is a fascist is a symbol from the old Roman Empire. It's a bundle of rods with an axe. That is, all of these, one rod together is weak, but if you tie them all together, they're very strong. So the nation is stronger tied together. That's essentially what fascism means. After the war, he's got his fascist party and his own fascist militia called the Black Shirts. These are a bunch of thugs, basically, who go around beating up people. One of the things they do is they take on the communists in Italy. A lot of people in Italy are afraid of communism. They hear what's coming out of the Soviet Union. They know what the communist threat is to their middle class status or to their property. So there's a great fear of communism in Italy. And Mussolini says, you know, I'm not afraid of the communists, nor are my Black Shirts. We'll fight them. We'll protect your business. We'll protect your land, that sort of thing. So they present themselves as sort of a protectors of middle class, sort of free market policy, market-based economies and private property. So people on the right think, yeah, we can use these guys to protect us against communism. Now, Italy itself, after the war, its economy is in shambles, high unemployment, lots and lots of problems, political turmoil, lots of turmoil, threat of communism. Mussolini decides, I'm going to try to take over the government. So he plans something known as the March on Rome. And instead of having to march on Rome, Italy is a constitutional monarchy. It's got a king. The King Victor Emmanuel says, look, why don't you just come to Rome? and form a cabinet with yourself as prime minister. So he doesn't even have to do anything revolutionary. The king just sort of invites him to form a cabinet, and he does that. He becomes prime minister, and he actually has to work with different political parties at the time. But within a couple of years, he outmaneuvers all the political parties. They get banned. And by 1926, the only political party that's allowed is the Fascist Party. You have a fascist totalitarian dictatorship. Now, it's totalitarianism light. There's a police state, but the Italians aren't really running around arresting all kinds of people. They throw communists in prison and a few others, but most people don't think that they're living in a brutal dictatorship or a totalitarian dictatorship in Italy. Most Italians are very happy with Mussolini. He has traditional social policies. Women should be in the home. You restrict birth control. Although he does have things for women who work in factories, like mothers have special rooms, breastfeeding rooms, where they can go in a factory and breastfeed. That might be kind of progressive today. But he's very much a traditionalist. They have a domestic role, women do, and they need to produce lots and lots of babies, especially sons, so those sons can serve in the military. Mussolini is not religious at all. But the Pope is in Italy, and what Mussolini does is sort of to improve his status in Rome. He reaches an agreement with the Pope. It's called the Concordat, reaching an agreement with the Pope in this Concordat, in which he gives the Pope his own land, his own country. That's the Vatican. That's where the Vatican comes about. Deal with Mussolini, along with a lot of money for the loss of the Papal States and all the territory they lost when Italy became a country. And in return, and he tells the Pope, you know, Catholicism is going to be the religion of Italy. Italians are going to be Catholic. Italy will remain Catholic. And in return, the Pope blesses Mussolini's dictatorship over Italy. This is very popular with the people of Italy. Unlike today, where Italy has a very low birth rate, a lot of Italians aren't terribly Catholic. Most Italians were Catholic, and they liked the idea of Mussolini, at least appearing to respect the church, reaching a deal with the papacy. But as I said, he's the weakest of these dictators. The Italians themselves don't feel that they live in this brutal dictatorship, because they don't. There's a lot of bluster with Mussolini. But one thing, he's remarkably popular because the economy is generally good under Mussolini. He has something known as the corporate state. It's kind of a managed free market system where you try to get workers and business owners to work together. Generally, the business owners make most of the decisions. Wages don't go up dramatically. But what Mussolini does is restore order and peace in Italy. Even in places like Sicily and southern Italy, the fascists go in and just wipe out the mafia. They end the terrorism of the mafia. So people tend to like that. And he's a popular figure. He's full of bluster and arrogance. He promotes himself, and Italy tends to be doing well under Mussolini. And there's Mussolini. He was about 5'4". You can see him. He sticks his chin out when he stands up to make himself look bigger. He's a great. Lots of great stories about Mussolini and his love affairs and all that stuff. But ultimately, he is going to side with this guy, which does not go well for Italy. And we're talking about Hitler, Adolf Hitler. We last looked at Germany. The Weimar Republic came into being. It is the system of government that had to accept the burdens of the Versailles Treaty, including reparations payments and being blamed for the war. It is a democracy, a full-fledged democracy. Men and women can vote, and it's got lots and lots of political parties. But there is a period of instability and turmoil, and just the economy collapses into hyperinflation in 1923, which is why France invaded the Ruhr to take reparations in steel and whatever's produced. It's just a total disaster. The communists in Germany rebel because there's a communist party within Germany. They try to establish a communist revolution. They get slaughtered by the army. Adolf Hitler is a guy who tries to seize power in what's known as the Beer Hall Putsch. He's the leader of the Nazi Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. That's a party with a long name, National Socialist German Workers' Party. But notice he has two ideas in there that are popular with people. Nationalism, they're going to promote German greatness. And socialism, the government is going to take care of people and provide programs for people. Hitler is anti-capitalist, although he's really going to have to rely on the free market when he takes power. but that's an ideology that later is going to appeal to people. National Socialism, that's where we get Nazi for short. Now, Hitler himself is not even a German citizen yet. Hitler's actually from Austria, and he joined the German army in World War I instead of joining the Austrian army. He was actually a brave soldier. He was decorated for bravery in World War I, but kind of after the war leads, he has an aimless life until he stumbles upon these right-wing nitwits, anti-Semitic nitwits, and forms the Nazi Party. The beer hall putsch is a total disaster. Hitler is actually, he announces that we're going to overthrow the country. The beer hall putsch has begun. The National Socialist Revolution has begun. He stands on a table in a beer hall. Beer halls are popular in Germany. And fires a shot, and they're going to march the next day. Well, the next day, the troops come out, the police come out, and they're going to fire on Hitler and other marchers. And he's going to flee, but later be arrested, put on trial for treason. Why? Because he overthrew the government. He tried to overthrow the government. At least he didn't overthrow the government. He tried to overthrow the government. That's treasonous. But he's put on trial. The thing about Germany at that time is that there are a lot of conservatives in charge of the German political system and in charge of the German court system. And the Nazis aren't conservatives. The Nazis are revolutionary, racist radicals. Conservatives are a bit different. Conservatives are traditionalists. These are the German aristocrats, the people with the von in their name who want to rule Germany. Hitler's different. He doesn't really like them, but there's some overlap in their ideology. You know, Hitler wants to restore German greatness, for instance, and he's put on trial. He defends himself, never a wise thing to defend yourself. But the prosecutor praises him for being a good patriot, because Hitler basically says, yeah, I'm a traitor, but I'm a traitor because the real government, the Weimar Republic, is a treasonous government that stabbed Germany in the back and caused us to lose World War I and all this stuff. He blames communists and liberals and socialists and Jews for all the problems of Germany when he's on trial. He's going to be convicted of treason, sentenced to 5 years, but he serves less than a year in prison. In prison, he's got a nice room. He's treated well. In fact, he has to tell the warden to cancel some of the visitors today. Too many people go to see him. But during his time in prison, he writes Mein Kampf. That's his political testament and autobiography, Mein Kampf, in which he lays out his ideology and sort of his future plans for Germany. And it's a very simplistic ideology. I do not recommend reading that book. Don't waste your time on that. But there are two ideas that come out of this. Race and space, race and space. Hitler is a devout racist. He believes that Germans, who he calls Aryans, are the master race, or at least they're going to be the master race after selective breeding. So Germans are the master race, and the German population is outgrowing the country of Germany, so it needs new space, new land, more territory. So race, the Germans are the master race, and they need a lot of land, space, Lebensraum, living space, meaning they need to go out and conquer parts of Europe. And he has his eyes on the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, but he also wants to dominate most of Europe. And what Hitler has is a racial hierarchy in his ideology. At the top, so the Germans. Just below them are various Germanic people like Scandinavians, the Dutch, the British are Germanic peoples. Below them are the Latin types of people, the French and the Italians and the Spanish. And at the bottom are the Slavic peoples, the Slavs of Eastern Europe. It's an ethnic group in Eastern Europe, Slavic people. Poles are Slavs. Russians are Slavs. Those the Serbians are Slavic people. Hitler calls them Untermenschen, subhuman. They're the worst of humanity. They're the lowest form of human being, unless you talk about this group that Hitler despises even more. That's Jews. Now, Jews aren't Untermenschen. Jews, according to Hitler, are very crafty and clever. They're smart, you know, Jewish scientists and doctors and successful businessmen, all that stuff. But they're an evil group of people who want to destroy Germany and pollute German blood. They have no allegiance to Germany. That is, German Jews who are citizens, Hitler says, has no allegiance to Germany. Their allegiance is to their Jewishness, which is a worldwide conspiracy, Jewishness. And Hitler has these ideas that the Jews are behind capitalism. Jews are also behind socialism. Basically, the Jews are behind anything he doesn't like. Anyway, writes this book, Mein Kampf. These ideas are set him down. Not many people read it, and then you don't even want to waste your time reading that. Gets out of prison, and what happens is the German economy, when he gets out of prison, is actually going to do pretty well. It's got the Dawes Plan, where we're giving money to Germany. The economy revives. You got the golden 20s, good economic times. Hitler decides to restore his leadership over the Nazi Party. It's a democracy. And he realized that the beer hall putsch failed. You're not going to be able to overthrow the government. So I'm just going to run for office. Let's take a legal path to becoming dictator of Germany. That is, if you win at the ballot box, you can seize power that way. Well, the economy is good, and the Nazi Party gets nowhere. It has very, very little support in this time period, 1924 to 29. There's Hitler with his little absurd mustache. A lot of people, by the way, think Hitler was short. He's actually the tallest of these three dictators. He's about 5'10", which is about normal height at that time. Anyway, not that you need to know that, but anyway. So there's really no success during the economic good times. People generally do not support radicals when the economy is going well. And that's what was going on. But then things collapsed in 1929 with the Great Depression. The Great Depression is the key. Without the Great Depression, the Nazis don't win. During the Great Depression, some 40% of Germans are unemployed or just temporarily employed. It is the worst hit of the major countries by the Great Depression. And that's when people turn to radicals. The Communist Party increases in popularity. The Communist Party gains seats in the German parliament, the Reichstag. And so do the Nazis. So do the Nazis. And they campaign and campaign. They campaign all the time. You know where the Nazis are. They're on all the street corners. They're in every city. They're always campaigning. And they're unbelievably successful at political campaigns. Lots of detail work. You know, they focus on pictures of Hitler. They do surveys to see what sort of images are preferred, whether they want Hitler in, you know, with a black background or a red one, the type of lettering, what slogans to use. You know, they gauge people. They ask people what they like best, and that's what they give them. And so the Nazis are master campaigners, political campaigners. And so is Hitler. He's a great speaker. Now, they didn't do much before the Great Depression, but the Great Depression is the key. And so they rise in power. They get more votes in elections. They become the largest party in 1932. Now, when I say the largest party, Germany has a lot of different political parties. So the largest party is one that gets about a third of the vote. It's not a majority party. They never get over 50% of the vote in any election in Germany. But because they're a largest party, what's going to happen is the German president, a guy by the name of Paul von Hindenburg, is going to say, let's give the Nazis a chance to solve the economy. There are a bunch of the economic crisis. There are a bunch of old conservatives in the German government, including Paul von Hindenburg, that von, he's an aristocrat, World War I hero, who think, yeah, this Hitler, he had just become a German citizen in 1932. Hitler never even graduated high school. He was largely a failure at much of what he tried before he entered politics. A lot of these old political leaders think we're going to box Hitler into a corner. We can use him in the Nazi Party to establish a more conservative authoritarian state. They don't know what they're doing. In fact, Hitler is politically crafty. He's going to outmaneuver all of these old conservative politicians and basically establish a one-party dictatorship within a year, where the Nazi Party is the only party and he has power. He has been giving something known as the Enabling Act that allows him to suspend the Constitution for like 5 years, essentially making him a dictator. So in no time, this guy who didn't even graduate high school, who never held political office until he became chancellor, that's the prime minister, that's the top official in Germany, he outmaneuvers everybody else and establishes a one-party state. He was popular. Why was he popular? You had a Great Depression, economic crisis. And also Germans were very, very much afraid of communism. The Communist Party was very powerful and gaining in strength. The communists would march and they beat up people. It wasn't just Nazis. And Hitler would often get his own sort of militia, the brown shirts. Mussolini had the black shirts. Hitler has the brown shirts. And they would go into communist strongholds and fight communists. They would tell people, we're not afraid of the communists. You can count on us. We'll protect you from communism. So that's part of it. But without the Great Depression, you do not have a Nazi dictatorship. And what the Nazis believe in is racism. And there are degrees of racism. The Nazis aren't the racists who are like, oh, I don't want to live in a neighborhood with those people. There are too many of those people. That sort of type of racist and bigot. Their racism means ultimately they're going to annihilate millions of people in the Holocaust. They're going to engage in genocide. Now, that doesn't happen until the war, but it is a brutal, brutal racism. They are absolutely serious about their racism. And initially, they're going to establish a police state with this guy, Heinrich Himmler. Look at that guy. Doesn't he look like he's part of the master race? That guy, oh, good God. He's head of the SS. That's the German police who control the police, the secret police. It's actually a bunch of different things, but the SS, think of them as the police of Germany. And the SS is going to be responsible for implementing a racial state. They're going to turn Nazi Germany into a racial state where Jews are going to be stripped of citizenship and encouraged to leave, that is, immigrate, get the hell out of the country. You're not wanted here, Jews, just leave. And they can't leave with most of their property. That has to stay. And there's a lot of anti-Semitic legislation that's going to be passed. Jews are going to be segregated. When you think of German Jews, I could probably show you images of Jews and Germans. And unless the Jews are sort of conservative or Orthodox or Hasidic, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. And many Jews were just Germans. Many Jews weren't even all that Jewish. They weren't that religious. They were sort of culturally and ethnically Jewish. And Jews fought for Germany in World War I. Jews were very patriotic. But Hitler has this fixation on Jews as enemies, and the policy initially is to discriminate against them. Don't let them have government jobs. Don't let them be teachers. Kick them out of the schools, out of a host of professions, and encourage them to leave. Jews, by the way, are less than 1% of the population of Germany. It's a small group of people, but they're going to be despised by the Nazis. And over time, many Germans just had, you had Jewish friends, Germans who became Jewish friends. Over time, you come to understand, many Germans come to understand that, it's probably not in my best interest to have someone who's Jewish as a friend. I want to be promoted in the company or move up in society, and Jews are not liked, so I better just not say hello or talk to this Jewish couple who used to come to my house, that sort of thing. So Jews are going to be excluded in a variety of ways. But it's not just Jews. They take their racism seriously. One of the things they're going to do is sterilize hundreds of thousands of people who have certain mental and physical disabilities, people who have learning disabilities. My late dad had a learning disability, but he was a college professor and did a number of impressive things, published and got awards for teaching. And so, today we have the Center for Dyslexia at Nichols. People who today have certain things that are just accepted within society. No. The Nazis say no. They're a threat to racial purity. They must be sterilized. Alcoholics, they must be sterilized. Although they don't actually go after some of these. A number of these leading Nazis are a bunch of degenerates and alcoholics and criminals. It's a criminal system the Nazis actually create, but they take their racism and racial purity seriously. So they go after lots and lots of different people, Jews among them, but also others. And they're going to later conduct a euthanasia program where they slaughter, where they kill and gas people with mental and physical disabilities. The German churches are going to step in and get them to stop some of that, because most Germans are Christian. That's a very anti-Christian thing to do. But Hitler is not a Christian, by the way. The Nazis are not Christians. The Nazis are not conservatives. They're revolutionary radicals, and they are not Christians. Although you do have a few Nazis that are Christian, but Nazism the Nazis are supposed to believe in God as a creator and God who created these racial laws, racial superiority, all this. God's a bigot. He's not a personal savior God, that sort of thing. He's a creator God who left. So the Nazis aren't atheists either, but they're not Christians. A couple of things dealing with the Jews. In 1935, there are a number of laws that are passed that strip Jews of their citizenship. Jews become subjects, and so they lose their citizenship. Citizenship is valuable, but they lose it. And they define someone who's Jewish as somebody who has 3 Jewish grandparents, unless you're a practicing Jew. If you go to synagogue regularly, you're Jewish, but you have to have 3 Jewish grandparents. If you have 2 or just 1, you're not a full Jew. You're a Mischlinge. You're a part Jew. Mischling is a vulgar term. It means mixed breed, which is what we use for animals. You know, in America, they use that term for human beings. You know, Jews. So it's a very vulgar term. And a number of these, you know, if you just had 1 Jewish grandparent, you're probably going to serve in the German army in World War II. You don't want to be full Jewish. You face the brunt of Nazi persecution and discrimination. 1938, there are a series of riots when a German diplomat is killed by a Polish Jew in Paris. There are a series of anti-Semitic riots, anti-Semitic pogroms, or synagogues throughout Germany are destroyed, set ablaze. Jews are killed. Well over 100 Jews are killed, and some 30,000 Jews end up being put in concentration camps. So you have these anti-Semitic riots. Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, is what it is, crystal glass. And you can see sort of a Jewish shop. It's got the sign there, and the glass is broken right there. All throughout Germany, this happens, not just in a couple of places. And managing this anti-Semitic system is going to be the SS, led by Heinrich Himmler. This is going to be the new elite, not those old conservative aristocrats, but these people who trace their racial purity back to the 18th century. You know, the SS is the system that controls the police and the concentration camps. You may have heard of Dachau and Buchenwald. These are concentration camps. These are prisons run by the SS. You know, there's a regular prison system, just like we have in this country, for people who commit crimes. And there's a separate prison system where people who commit political crimes or undesirables, or whoever Heinrich Himmler wants thrown in prison, will be put in there, Dachau, Buchenwald. Later in the war, you get the death camps like Auschwitz and Treblinka. That's later in the war. These are brutal places to be, concentration camps, but they are not the death camps. And we'll stop right here.